In this lecture, we're going to talk about business markets. Typically, we refer to this as B2B marketing or business marketing. We're going to go with B2B, but sometimes I'll interchange those terms. But when we think about business marketing, we have to understand a couple of things. One, most of the world, especially here in the US, we are a consumer society. Everything flows down to the consumer. Most businesses are in business to serve a consumer, to serve us. It could be the rubber manufacturers that make the rubber for tires. Well, they depend on the consumer market because if the consumers aren't buying cars or aren't buying replacement tires, they have no business. So everything just feeds down to the business market, or sorry, to the consumer markets. So keep that in mind as we move through here. But there are a lot of differences between the business market and the consumer market. Now again, I'm not big on definitions, but I do want to point things out when it's needed, just so that we can have them, so that we know what they're there. Now, organizational buying is basically the decision-making process by which formal organizations establish the need for purchased products and services and identify, evaluate, and choose among alternative brands and suppliers. This is from Webster and Wind. This is their definition of it. So what does this mean? It's basically, we talked about in the last lecture with the consumer decision-making process. Well, we also have an organizational decision-making process. Although there are some similarities, they do things very differently, and buyers are different, of course, between consumers and business buyers, which we're going to see. That commercial was from a Super Bowl many years ago, and it was not targeted at most of the people because most of us were, as consumers, were not buying the services that EDS was selling. But it made its point. It got the EDS's name out there, and they actually grew into a very large multi-billion-dollar company at the time. But when we think about the business markets, they consist of different organizations in different types of industries. There's agriculture, transportation, construction, manufacturing, communications, banking, forestry. All of these are different types of industries. Now, a lot of them will be connected to others. For example, the forestry industry and the construction industry are connected very much together. The forestry industry also has to use transportation and distribution. So all of these things, they do intermingle with each other. So it is important to understand that how things flow. So we can think about the business market as consisting of all the organizations that acquire goods and services used in the production of other goods or services that are sold, rented, and supplied to others. Again, eventually, the consumer. Now in the business market, marketers, they face similar challenges as do business to consumer marketers, B2C or consumer goods products. So here's how they're similar. One, you still have to understand the consumer needs. You have to understand the customer needs. So what is it that the customer is looking for? If you're selling raw material, you have to understand not only your customer, those that are buying your raw material, you also have to understand their customer because all of it is interconnected. We have to also identify areas of growth, what's changing out there, where there are opportunities. We have to improve value management techniques, use better marketing metrics. I mean, one of the things that's hard to understand is how effective are the efforts of marketers. How effective is it that we run a commercial or we print an ad in a trade magazine or whatever it's going to be? How effective is that? These are things that marketers do struggle with. So we struggle with it also in the consumer market, but also in the business-to-business market. Business markets, I mean, the marketers, they have to understand global markets. They have to understand changes and what's going on into it. One of the things that is most important today is protecting their product category so that it does not become a commodity. I mean, if you think about it, wood. What's the difference between one you manufacture and another? Gasoline, what's the difference between one manufacturer and another? Raw steel, what's the difference? These products become commodities, and the only thing that wins then is low price. And that's not what you want. If you're in the business market, you don't want your product to become a commodity. We also have to worry about gaining support for the marketing concept, even inside the business-to-business world. If you are working for a B2B manufacturer, you still have to understand that it's all about delivering value. It's the same thing as in the consumer market. Understand consumer needs, deliver value to the customer, and things actually take care of themselves. However, there are a lot of differences between business markets and consumer markets. One of the big differences is that the buyer is professional. In the business world, the buyers, that's their only job. They meet with salespeople, they buy products that they are going to need or raw materials that their company needs. It's not as emotional, if you will, because they are, again, very professional, and their livelihood, their jobs, depends on how good of a job they do at buying. There are fewer companies, but they buy more. So there are fewer larger buyers in the world. If you are selling steel, well, think about some of the products that could be made with steel or end up in the consumer hands that are steel. You may have things in your garage, your automobile, things like this. There's a lot of those. However, there's only few companies that buy that much steel. So you have to keep in mind that way. Now, other things. Oftentimes in an industry, the industry is going to be geographically concentrated. For example, years ago, things have changed a little bit now. If you wanted to sell automobile or sell to automobile manufacturers, you had to go to one place, Detroit, because that's where the big three were. Today, if you want to sell computer parts, you're going one place, Silicon Valley. Now, there are small manufacturers all over the country. I mean, there's Micron that's up in Idaho. There's several others scattered about that you have to see, but most of it is concentrated in a geographical area. The thing about selling to business markets or selling to business customers is that it's all about the personal relationship. Oftentimes, the buyer is not buying from a company, they're buying from the salesperson. They have a relationship, they have a trust, and they know that that salesperson is going to take good care of them. And that salesperson could leave and go to another manufacturer, and they're likely going to get the business there because of that trust factor that has been built up over time. You're generally not going to make a sale on the first call. If it's a cold call, if it's the first time seeing a company, it's going to take multiple visits because of that personal relationship has to be built up over time. So, other things, again, we have different structures inside business markets. For example, you may have a manufacturer or a raw material supplier. They can sell directly to large customers, but they can also sell through intermediaries, through smaller, to reach smaller customers. So there's a lot of things that go on, but it is the necessary evil, because without business markets, there's no consumer market. Business markets also differ from the consumer market in basically their demand functions, which we're going to get into a little bit of the economics aspect of it here. Other things we have to look at is what's called derived demand. And this is where the demand in the business market depends solely on demand in the consumer market. For example, imagine that you sell the paper that is used to manufacture and print textbooks. Well, think about what it happens for sales to go up or down. You have to have more people buying textbooks, more students buying a textbook, which depends on the professor picking the textbook for the students to use. And the thing is that if we see that things are going to change in the future, it takes time for everything to flow through. It's not an instantaneous, because textbooks are printed years out, or basically 6 months out. But it just takes time for things to go and change. There's other aspects such as inelastic demand, and that, for example, total demand for many business goods and services is inelastic. It's not really affected by changes in price. I mean, if you go to it and the price of tires increases, well, unless that's going to change and influence the total price that a car is going to be sold for, it's not going to alter how many tires are going to be purchased. And there's also an aspect about fluctuating demand. And for example, where demand in business goods tend to be more volatile than demand in consumer goods. And at times, a rise of 10% in the consumer demand can result in the rise of business demand by as much as 200%. So if I increase the number of, say, iPhones or smartphones that are being sold out there, you go all the way back up the supply chain to all the parts that are involved in there, and it's going to be an incredible growth rate. There are also varying buying situations that we run into, and this is very similar between the consumer markets and the business market. For example, a straight rebuy. A straight rebuy in the business world is basically, last year we bought 100,000 units from you of this particular product. We need 100,000 more. We just reorder it. No, don't have to change anything. I'm just buying it again. Same thing with us. We run out of salt. We go to the store. We buy salt. We don't have to rethink salt. We have modified rebuys. Here, for example, let's say that last year we bought 100,000 black wall tires. But this year we think, oh my gosh, white walls are going to come back. So we're going to modify our order. Instead of buying black walls, we're now going to buy white walls. That's a modified rebuy. Then we have basically what we call a new task. Things that we have never purchased before. Here we're going to go through a little bit different process because we don't have a supplier. We've never bought this product. We don't really have in-depth confidence in anybody we bought from and for our other products. And we're going to go through in a complete cycle and a complete process to get this new product that we need. We're going to talk about that next. So before we get to the buying decision process, a couple of things that we need to talk about. If you think about why professional buying is so valuable, it is very important to the profit responsibility of the firm. If you're overpaying for product, your profits are going to be decreased. But we look at it about what matters. Well, we have to think about, what's the warranty, the technical capabilities of the supplier that we're buying from, price, quality, delivery, past performance. Do they have the production capabilities to make things happen? All of these things are criteria that we look at to make sure of who we are going to be dealing with and buying from is going to be able to deliver what they promise. Now, inside a business, it's not just a buyer sitting there waiting for somebody to come and sell something that they've never needed before. There are different things that occur. We have different participants that occur in the buying process. Think about if you work for a company and your computer goes out. What happens? Well, you contact IT, or you contact somebody in the IT department that's going to get you what you need. So in other words, you have different players. Now, inside your company, your computer goes out. You probably can't have the approval to go out and just go online and buy a new one. You probably have to go through a process. Well, here's where we have the initiator. Okay, that was in this scenario. That's you. Your computer went out. You're the initiator. You talk to somebody and tell them that your computer went out. They have somebody probably in the IT that goes, okay, this is the type of computers that we're buying now. You have a decider that's going to make the decision of which one you're ultimately going to buy. Somebody that's going to approve the decision. You have the gatekeeper that is kind of filtering information in and out. And then ultimately you have a buyer that actually makes the purchase. Now, again, in some companies, these different participants could be the same person. Okay? The approver and the buyer could be the same person as the decider. But it's all in there about how things flow through in the business markets. Again, it's not just somebody picks up the phone and places an order. Different people are going to be involved. So if you think about a buying center, now a buying center is basically a group of individuals, and their entire job is to buy. Okay, they're the purchasing department for an organization. And buying centers, they kind of have multiple participants with a variety of backgrounds, and they can come from finance or engineering. They can be senior managers. And these differences must be taken into account as sales messages, they kind of have to be structured not to overly appeal to one participant at the risk of alienating somebody else. Now, I used to be in sales. I spent many years calling on national accounts, calling on Winn-Dixie, calling on Kroger and others. And the thing is that they have a very set structure for how things operate. And there are different players inside each one of those organizations. There was a buying center, although I typically dealt with one buyer with every customer that I have. But they always had what we call the gatekeeper. The gatekeeper was the one that kind of controlled the flow of information. We could call them the administrative assistant or something like that was probably their titles. And they controlled who got to see the boss. Well, these are the ones you always take care of because they can control what phone calls that are actually phone messages are received, who gets an appointment, and things like this. The thing is that inside a buying center, you have all of these different people that are influenced in many different ways by their own perceptions. You have to understand these things. So if you're in sales, if you're calling on in the business-to-business world, you have to understand that it's very similar to the consumer market in that you want to go after the right customer. But who are those customers? Here you have to figure out who's going to be the most profitable, who's worth my time, who's worth the effort and energy to build as a client. Because as I said, it takes multiple sales calls to get a buy. It takes a relationship building effort. So those things take time. So you have to figure out what is going to be the best ones for me to target. So when we think about that, we're looking at who's going to be promising today and in the future. So once I identify the firms, I must be able to determine how best to reach them, how best to sell to them. Who's the major decision maker? What decisions do they influence? What's the level of influence? What criteria do they use? Now, one of the things is that if you've ever been in sales, or if you work your way into sales later in your career, you learn to understand each one of your buyers. You get out on the field, you get out in the market, you're talking to people, and believe it or not, salespeople do share information. You run into them, you're in the same kind of sales circuit, you run into them in the same hotel or sitting in office, and you do make relationships and you learn to talk to each other and kind of pick each other's brain, although you don't give away trade secrets, but you can learn from them. So it's all about who to target, what's going to be the message that works, finding out how the best way to approach every buyer that you have. Just as in the consumer decision-making process, there are stages in the buying process for business-to-business markets. They run through the same thing, problem recognition. But here they're getting different descriptions and characteristics of what is needed. Oftentimes they know exactly what it is, oftentimes they don't, and they have to discover what it is they actually need. Find the right supplier, do proposal solicitations, select the supplier, give them the order after you've selected one, give them the specifications of what the order is supposed to be, and then review how well they did. Oftentimes you may do that on a yearly basis. So let's look at each one of these in turn. So if we look at the stages in the buying process, we can see that problems can be discovered from both internal or external stimulus or sources. broken machine, low stock levels, or a new product being developed by R&D. All of these things are going to lead us to understanding that we need some new type of product, or we need to place an order to replace the broken machine. All of these different things. But think about the external stimuli, though. Oftentimes it's a matter of understanding what's out in the world. And the more that we see, the more that we take in information from various sources, such as visiting a trade show, seeing an ad in a trade magazine, something like this, it may help us to understand that, hey, this type of product could be better than what we are currently using. So after this first stage, we understand, hey, we need something. Then we move and we set about going to the next stage. So after we've discovered a need, we then look at what is it we specifically that we are required to have. With a new product development, for example, we would have R&D tell us these are the type of components that we are going to need, and we can put together different technical specifications looking at the reliability, durability, price, things like this, to really understand what it is exactly that we are going to be buying. We want to analyze all of the different aspects of the product and what we're going to be buying to make sure that it's going to be, one, exactly what we need, and two, it's going to be given to us, or we're going to be able to acquire it in such a way that we're going to be profitable. So we've discovered a problem, something that we need. We've gone through and we've developed the specifications for exactly what it is. Now we have to find somebody that is going to be able to provide us with that good. Well, where do we look? Well, in searching for suppliers, we can use different trade directories, advertisements, trade shows. All of these different things we can use to help us understand who are the potential suppliers for our product. Now, if you're out there and, for example, putting it on the other side, let's say that you are a company that sells this type of product. Well, how do you find the companies that are in need? Well, there's a lot of different sources. Again, the trade shows, doing advertisements, and oftentimes it's a matter of keeping your ears open so that you can understand and hear when you catch wind of a particular company that may be going into a new product area that might use your product. The next stage in this process is soliciting a proposal. So we've got a list. Here are the, let's say, 8 companies that could produce and provide this product for us. We contact them and we ask them to submit a proposal. We give them all the specifications and we say we've got, say, 6 weeks to provide us with a written proposal. Of those that we get back, we will look through them, and we would probably, in many cases, we would invite 3, maybe 4 different suppliers to come and give a formal presentation to us. Here, again, if you flip it on the other side, the marketer has to be very skilled in researching, writing, and presenting proposals. We have to think about, again, the value that we're going to deliver. And if you understand, again, the marketing concept, you're going to be able to create a proposal that is going to talk about and focus on, hey, this is what we can do for you. This is how we're going to help you if you give us, your business. The next step, we've seen all the proposals, and now we pick which supplier do we want. Here, buyers are oftentimes going to specify and rank the desired supplier attributes that they're looking for, often using some type of supplier evaluation model. And in some cases, companies are reducing the overall number of suppliers that they're dealing with just to make it easier, and they want to choose suppliers who can be responsible for large component systems. On the other side of that equation, it's generally not a good idea, especially in raw materials and where possible, to have a single supplier. If something goes down, if something happens with that one supplier, it could stop the entire manufacturing process of what you're trying to produce. So you have to balance these things and understand, what's the right number of suppliers to have, how many suppliers are going to get, and what percentage of the business each one of them is going to get. And so again, you have to be very careful and selective when picking the right buyer or the right supplier. So after we've selected the suppliers, the buyer then negotiates the final order. And depending on the product, the buyer may end up leasing the product. Who knows? And advantages of leasing, you can get the latest, greatest product, better service, conservation of your capital or money, and there's also tax advantages. But oftentimes, for maintenance, repair, and operating items, MROs, buyers are beginning to use stockless purchase plans, such as blanket contracts, that establish long-term relationship. Here, what happens is that the supplier, they basically agree to resupply the buyer as needed at agreed upon prices over a specific period of time. What they're looking for is that instead of me warehousing 1,000 units of this, bulk item, you're sending it to me as I need it. And we don't have to go back and forth on, making a new order every time. You're just going to make sure that I stay in stock. So when we're looking at it, you have to understand oftentimes, how long something is going to take to deliver. You have to understand, can they meet the needs that I have? Are they able to produce the amount that I'm going to need? So again, you have to take all of these different things in very seriously and make sure that everything stays up to date. So we've gone through the entire process. We've got the product coming in, and what we're going to do is we're basically going to go through and we're going to look and do some type of performance review on not only the suppliers, but also the process that we went through. We may look at different evaluations, different weighted score methods that we're going to use just to see if the suppliers that I have are delivering on the best that they can, not only as far as the quality of the product, but also in the price of the product. Now this grid basically looks at all of the different stages of the buying process, and then looks at it as in the buying classes. For example, new task, modified rebuy, straight rebuy. So if you look at, for example, the straight rebuy, I don't have to worry about it for problem recognition or general need description. But product specifications may change over time. We may need something a little bit different, and so I have to keep up with that. Supplier search, solicitation, and supplier selection, don't even have to worry about it. But I will still continuously do a performance review. But for the new task, all of these steps are going to be followed. Everything that we've talked about so far has been looked at from the perspective of, I guess, the consumer market overall. Because we buy, manufacturers buy products from suppliers to make products that are going to be sold to consumers. But there are other institutional and government markets out there that fall inside the same category, although they don't really deal with the consumer aspect. So if we think about it, many of the same buying habits that we looked at previously are going to fall under other institutions and governments. Okay? However, there are certain features in this part of the B2B market. For example, many institutions are characterized by having low budgets and captive clients, if you will. Hospitals, for example, they decide what quality of food to buy for their patients, and the goal here is they're not to make money off the food that they buy, because the food is part of the total service package that they're delivering. But however, if the quality of food that they deliver can damage the hospital reputation, which could in turn hurt them in the long run. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that high school and middle schools kind of fall into that same category, because they really don't seem to care about the quality of the food, according to my kids. But governments are a little bit different, because they typically require the sellers to submit bids and most often award the contract to the lowest bidder. In 2009, and this is the last data that I have, the U.S. government bought goods and services worth about $220 billion, making it the largest customer in the world. So that's where our money goes. All right, so that wraps up business to business marketing for the week. It's a little different because, again, it is a little bit different animal because we're thinking about it from the business to business market. But hopefully, when we start talking about things next week, when we're looking at segmentation and different elements along that line with market research, it's going to get back into the traditional marketing, I guess, from my view. Have a great week, and I'll post next week's lectures before Monday. Have a great day.